Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking a truly fascinating case where international law, massive institutional bureaucracy, and real human lives just slam right into each other. We're going to explore exactly what happens when a person's entire career gets derailed by a giant digital system, leaving them stuck in this weird legal gray area where the actual harm is completely ignored. So let's jump right into the official documents and see how this all unfolded.
To really get the stakes here, we have to start with the human element. Take a listen to this quote from a recent letter written by the appellant at the center of our story. He writes, "Justice, in my experience, was not refused openly, it was postponed indefinitely until silence replaced accountability." Wow. I mean, that perfectly captures the pure frustration of fighting a never-ending procedural battle, right? It's not a quick no, it's just this slow, agonizing erosion of the whole process.
And, the context behind those words makes them hit even harder. The person writing this is a United Nations professional who is currently displaced in Gaza. In his recent letters, he talks about how his home was completely destroyed by war. So you have this profound, immediate humanitarian crisis layered right on top of a decade-long professional and legal fight. He's literally writing from a war zone, still looking for answers to a bureaucratic maze that started years before he lost his home.
So how did this whole thing kick off? Well, let's rewind a bit to 2013 and look at this number, 166. That is the exact number of high-level UN job applications that were held up by a massive software glitch in their recruitment system. Just imagine that for a second. You spend months perfecting your resume, applying for all these senior roles, only to find out a digital error was silently blocking you the entire time.
Let's actually break down the timeline of this glitch. It happened in the UN's Inspira recruitment system. Between October 2013 and February 2014, the applicant applied for a bunch of posts. Every time, the system gave him a confirmation receipt. Everything looked fine. But behind the scenes, he had actually hit a hidden system limit of 999 applications. The kicker here is that the software completely failed to tell him about this limit until late February. By the time he actually got the notification, over 4 months had passed, and the deadlines for these critical senior positions were long gone.
And honestly, the official response perfectly captures that classic bureaucratic mindset. In the spring of 2014, internal emails from the UN Office of Human Resources Management confirmed the glitch existed, but they just bluntly stated that the technical issue upholding his 166 applications had, quote, now been resolved. The applications were finally released to hiring managers, but for the applicant, the damage was already done. Deadlines were blown, and he argued this delay totally robbed him of a fair shot at those jobs. This one technical glitch sparked what would turn into a 10-year grievance process.
Which brings us to part one of this story, the jurisdictional legal maze. After being disqualified from several senior D2 level posts, the applicant took his case straight to the internal UN justice system in 2015. But if you think they debated the fairness of that software glitch, think again. Instead, he walked right into a massive legal wall.
To make sense of the court's reaction, we really need to understand a specific legal concept, locus standi. It basically just means the legal right or capacity to bring a lawsuit to a court. When this case hit the United Nations Dispute Tribunal, or the UNDT, the judges didn't look at the whole Inspira glitch situation at all. They only looked at locus standi. They were strictly asking, does this specific person even have the legal right to sue the UN Secretariat in our court?
And this gets right to the core of why his case was rejected. The tribunals impartially looked at his employment status, and here's the catch, the applicant was actually a staff member of UNRW. That's the UN Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees. Standard UN Secretariat staff have contracts that let them bring cases to the UNDT, but UNRW staff, they have totally different contracts and actually use their own separate dispute tribunal. So, because he was applying for Secretariat jobs while holding an UNRW contract, the judges ruled he was essentially an outside applicant for those specific roles. And because of that, he had absolutely no standing to bring a case to the UNDT.
Ultimately, the United Nations Appeals Tribunal issued judgment number 2016 UNAT-655, affirming the lower court's decision. They stuck to a very strict interpretation of the law, ruling that because he lacked locus standi, his claims about unfair treatment and his request to suspend the hiring actions were just straight up not receivable.
Seeing the signatures of the presiding judges on that final order really drives home the absolute finality of this legal process. The courts affirmed the dismissals entirely on jurisdictional grounds. They never once examined the actual harm caused by those 166 delayed applications. The legal doors slammed shut purely based on a technicality of standing.
That leads us into part two, the institutional gap.
It begs the question, what happens when a legal system functions exactly the way it's supposed to, following all its strict jurisdictional rules, but leaves a very real, very substantive grievance totally unaddressed?
Let's map out the timeline here to see how the institution handled this gap. In 2015, the cases get dismissed. Fast forward to June 2016, and the highest appeals tribunal affirms those dismissals. But then, something pretty unusual happens in July 2016. Internal emails from the Executive Office of the Secretary General show the matter being referred for administrative attention. For the applicant, this looked like a huge institutional pivot. It felt like senior leadership was finally recognizing that since the courts couldn't fix it, some kind of informal mediation was needed. But then, late 2016 rolls around. The Secretary General's mandate ends, the leadership changes, and the case just goes totally dormant.
The actual wording in that July 2016 correspondence from the Executive Office is super interesting. It says, "You have requested to compete for a position. This matter is being referred to the Office for Human Resources Management for appropriate attention." To the appellant, this was definitely not just a polite brush-off. He saw it as proof that the absolute highest offices recognized how exceptional his situation was. He genuinely believed they had committed to finding a fair resolution.
However, as the source documents show in emails from 2017, the incoming administration saw things very differently. They viewed it as just a standard recruitment issue for HR to handle, and they refused to intervene in competitive hiring processes. Because the previous administration's files were left behind and any informal commitment seemed to dissolve during the transition, the result was over 10 years of silence. 10 whole years of unanswered petitions, where his professional life was basically frozen in time.
And that brings us to Part 3, Restorative Justice. This loops our narrative right back to the present day. After hitting dead ends in every legal and administrative avenue for a decade, and now literally facing displacement in a conflict zone, the appellant has put forward a very specific framework to finally resolve this.
Let's take an impartial look at the specific requests he made in his recent letter. He proposed a resolution asking the institution for 3 things. First, to acknowledge the long-term institutional harm caused by the software delay. Second, to provide some form of moral and material compensation for a decade of waiting. And third, to finally grant him fair and genuine consideration for a D2 level position based strictly on his actual merit and experience as a way to correct the procedural failures of the past.
He sums up this request with a really powerful phrase: not charity, not privilege, but dignity restored. I think that brilliantly anchors all these dense academic legal concepts like jurisdiction and locus standi firmly back to the human element. It shows exactly what happens when a person's life collides with an immovable bureaucratic machine that doesn't have a way to fix its own technical mistakes.
Which leaves us all with one final, overarching question to think about. When legal frameworks lack jurisdiction, how do institutions address substantive harm? It's a tough one, right? It forces us to look at the balance between procedural legality and true institutional accountability. A system can operate perfectly within the letter of the law, but does that mean it's actually just? Thank you so much for exploring this complex maze with me on this explainer. Keep questioning the systems around you, and I'll catch you in the next one.